What is up, everybody? Oh yeah, Discord. I gotta get in the Discord stage. My name is Indy, and this is Indie Game Business, and we've got our special guest here, Jay Powell. He's a special guest. I'll jump into Discord right now. I didn't mean to. I got sidetracked, but anyways, we're talking about publishers. We're talking about warning signs that you might be working with a shady publisher.
Exactly. All right. So, folks on Discord, if you can't hear me or I'm getting echoed, tell me, because I seem to never get these settings right. When
it looks like your mic is muted in Discord.
All right. So there we go.
There we go.
Oh, all right. So where do we want to start? All right. So one, I want to be upfront. This is not a torches and pitchfork session. We're not naming names in here, and we're going to ask you not to do it either. But we are going to be talking about a very serious issue, and that is, how you know if you're like going down the route of working for or looking at one of these shady publishers. And it's very important that we understand that there's a difference between a shady publisher, sketchy, immoral, illegal publisher, and one that's just not good at their job. Just because they aren't necessarily the best publisher out there doesn't make them sketchy or illegal or anything like that. It's like everything else. There's 700 some publishers out there that we track. Some of them are going to be better than others. But we're going to go through some of those warning signs as well as, take questions from you all as well. So if you are out there listening and or watching on Twitter or YouTube or wherever, and you've got a question, just pop it into chat. We will get to it live on the show.
Looks like there's only one or two in Discord.
Yeah, no, there's like already a whole page of questions in Discord.
That's right.
Like, wow, y'all are going to make my job super easy today.
I think our only podcast for the rest of the year, we could do it 3 times a week, could be about publishers.
Well, yeah, true. Yeah. That's very possible. But it is. I mean, it's one of those things that we see, and we got a comment already. Calix, we actually had a game dev Discord yesterday talking about that, since we were all scared of like ending up in serious trouble. Feel free to pull the questions from that and pop them in here. I missed that. That would have been good. But it's a serious thing, and unfortunately, a lot of developers are susceptible to this because you want your game to be seen, you want your game to be published, and sometimes that excitement over having someone interested in this thing that you've created overbears that whole cautionary side of, wait a minute, do I need to be doing this? And every now and then we see publishers pop up in chats or on articles or what have you, where they're doing sketchy ass stuff. So what we want to do today is just go through some of the things that you want to look out for. So before we get too far into the questions, here's some basics. So one, we always preach to our developers, whenever you're approached by a publisher, you always want to go and ask, some of the teams that they've worked with, how did, the process go? One of the quick things that you can do is simply go on Steam. If a publisher has an extensive list of poorly reviewed games and they just come out one after another and they're continuing to come out, that's a sign. If it's generally simply a bad publisher, they're going to market themselves right out of the store eventually, because they're not making any money and they can't afford the overhead, and they're going to go away. But with a lot of these publishers that we see, that are doing less than legal stuff in the background, what you will see is a big old long list of mixed to poor reviews on Steam. And that should be like one of your very first warning signs, because let's face it, you don't want to, sell your game to a publisher who doesn't know what they're doing in the first place. So that's one of the first things. Another big one is poor communication. And let me preface this by saying, for those of you who are new to the show or don't know my background, I've been doing business in the industry for 25 years. I've pretty much seen it all in one way, shape, or form. I have worked as a publisher. I have worked as a developer, as an agent. And for the last 10 or 11 years, I've run a consulting company. We have clients who are developers and publishers and tech companies. And so there's no bias here. I've got, clients on both sides of the table. But one of the things that immediately starts, question marks going off in my head, and it should in anyone's, is when the communication is poor. It's one thing if everybody's busy, and we are seeing, in the COVID post-ish COVID world, these deals take longer to do, for a variety of reasons, but simply because everyone isn't responding to your email within like 2 hours. That's not necessarily the bad sign. It's when, things go for days and weeks and you've got basic questions and they're not getting answered. That's when the issues come in. We always say that these, relationships never get better. If it's sketchy and confusing and just poor communication on day one, it's going to be like that for the rest of the situation. It's not like someone's over at the publishing company is going to immediately flip a switch and become way better to deal with, because it's just not. So if you are, constantly being put off, or it doesn't seem like you're any importance to that publisher whatsoever, that's a warning sign. Because if they don't have time for you during that, pre-signature deal where everyone's getting to know each other and getting to understand the game better and everything else, it's a very big red flag that they may just not care about the game in the first place. Once you are in some contract negotiation, if you ever have a company tell you that you don't need a lawyer to look over it because this is just boilerplate, or for some other reason along the line, major red flag. You should always have an attorney look over this stuff. And I know attorneys aren't always cheap. You don't need one on retainer for the entire time, but you do need to have an attorney look over, any agreement that you get from a publisher, or any agreement you get from anybody, quite frankly. The ability to hide one or two little sentences in a contract that completely changes the tone of the entire contract is very easy to do.
Or an Oxford comma. I was just reading an article about that. There was an Oxford comma and it changed everything.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's even like more subtle than I was thinking. But the little things in there like the IP ownership, or when money is actually due. There's a lot of very easy ways that companies can turn what looks like at face level a normal contract into something that is not at all normal. And keep in mind, these are I've took some quick notes and jotted down some of these things. These are all based on my experience. I have actually seen all of this shit happen, and so I'm sure there's going to be other folks in comments and out there listening that have other examples as well. But everything that I'm going to go through here is something that we have seen firsthand. And I know companies that have tried to do this. Another like easy up there with look at the Steam reviews or look at the game reviews for that publisher's contracts. Another very easy one is bad PR. Google the publisher. If you Google the publisher and there's a load of threads about how, they ripped off another company or how they're bad mouthing, somebody, that's a very, very good indicator of, what working with that publisher is going to be like. We have seen very, very recently, CEOs of publishers come out and make a comment on Twitter that did not play well to Twitter, and they were immediately booted from their own companies, because that's how important image and PR is to a publisher these days. And so if you come across someone, and for whatever reason, it's just line item after line item of they've done something, atrocious and offended developers or seemingly screwed them over and that sort of stuff. Big warning flag, because every publisher out there needs to be very aware of their, how they're seen in the industry, because, at the same time, there's a lot of, competition for publishers. There's a lot of competition for good games too. We scout for publishers. I see how quickly some of these good games can get picked up, and you can't be successful running around out there if you are constantly having bad PR and bad press in the in the industry. So, all right, Dan, I'm going to let you take control of questions, because otherwise, my full blown ADD will kick in and I'll get distracted left and right. So just jump in when we have
just jump in. Okay, I was just posting some stuff. Okay, well, let's hit the first question. Here we go. This is from. I'll post it up on screen here. Banners. New one. There we go. We don't want it to scroll. There we go. And here we go. What is the average deal you sign with the publisher? How much, what percentage should they get?
All right. So we're going to go to our patented "it depends" answer. And I saw that article by the whoever it was, that maybe it was a lawyer that went through like 30 different contracts and assigned, this is what you should be getting. That's a load of shit. I mean, to be blunt, because every single contract is going to be different. Every single deal is going to be different. What percentage should you get? You should get the percentage that you feel is fair and it works for you. Don't go out there trying to be that company that, has a mandate of, well, we have to get 80% of the revenue and we want $500,000 up front. While there may be a publisher out there willing to do it, don't get yourself wrapped up in what other companies have in their contracts. Don't compare yourself to other games and other developers. Every single situation, every single publishing deal is different. Now, obviously, there are limits. If, everything starts flipping around and getting turned back to the way it used to be, where, developers would get a 15% royalty on their own work and all this other stuff, yes, that's bad. But every deal has to be looked at individually. And this is the way that I always, when we're working with our clients, this is the way that I look at these deals. Is it a good fit for both parties? Are you going to do better off with this publisher and make more money than you would have on your own? That's what I always preach and always recommend. Yes, there are plenty of articles and conversations out there about this is what you should get. No, it's depending on your situation, you could come in and one publisher offer you 300 grand upfront as an advance and a smaller royalty or rev share on the back end. You could have another one come in and say, look, we can't do that much money up front. We're going to give you like 50 grand, but we're going to guarantee you 250 grand in marketing. And they have a complete marketing plan laid out, and it's something they have obviously put time into and they know what they're doing. And then you could have a third one where it's somewhere in the middle. All of those options for a specific developer are viable. It just depends on what your personal situation is. Do you need the cash now versus in the future? Are you willing to take a little more of a risk because it looks like the company that you're working with really understands the marketing for your type of game and is really going to get behind it? There's always too many variables in there to really sit down and say, this is what they should absolutely get. The general rule, though, is the more a publisher puts into the development and the budget of the game overall, the more that they're going to want on the back end. Now, if it starts going below 50-50, to you as the developer, that's when you need to start getting a little bit worried, unless there's some very specific clauses in there that says, okay, this is how much it's going to make. Or if the publisher funded the entire thing, you're probably not going to get 50-50 day one, but it really just depends. I mean, I can make arguments going in many, many different directions. So sorry.
No, and just because we're talking about shady publishers or whatever doesn't mean they're all shady. I mean, publishers offer a lot. They offer experience. They offer, the knowledge of how to get into different game platforms or different console platforms. And, they have ins and they have experience in social media and all that marketing knowledge. A lot of people just say, oh, I want to do it myself. But then you got to stop with your game development. You got to focus on social media. You got to do marketing, and you can't just like, oh, I'm going to market my game and not know anything about it. Well, you can, but publishers really help out big time.
I just noticed that despite the fact that I told you I was going to do the announcement in Discord, I typed it all up, but never actually hit enter. So sorry.
I put an announcement in there.
I got it. I saw it. I was like, oh, well, Dan realized that I completely missed that, and he's on it.
Next question, because we got
yeah.
Okay, Nightwolf. How can you gauge a new publisher's skills, whether brand new to publishing or adding publishing as a secondary role to their business? And then the little next part was shady or unexperienced.
Good question. Thank you, Nightwolf. So whether they're brand new to publishing, it's almost like the exact same way a publisher is going to look at you and see, okay, are you worth dealing with because you're brand new to development? Look at the people involved. The beautiful thing about this industry is for all the billions and billions and billions of dollars that we generate and all the, hoopla that we get that we're bigger than movies, whether or not you count hardware, whatever, it's a very small industry. We all know each other. And that holds true for publishers, developers, marketing teams, what have you. The big, joke around our office is that there's nobody that we can't find in 2 phone calls, because it's a very tight-knit industry. And that's why, going back to that whole PR side, if you burn bridges in this industry, it will absolutely burn you out in the long run. And the long run isn't even that long, within like a couple of years, most likely. So with everyone knowing everyone and being such a tight-knit community that is very open about talking about a whole lot of different things, if the publisher's brand new, and just for the sake of reference, over the last 2 weeks, I've seen 3 new publishers pop up. Either brand new publisher or they are, like you said, they're adding publishing to something that they were already doing. But publishers come and go very, very quickly in this industry. At least a percentage of them do. So if they're new, look at the people behind it and go on LinkedIn or Google them or whatever and see if they have publishing experience, themselves as individuals. If so, there's your basis. You can look at that. You can make some phone calls and see who that person worked with later on, that sort of stuff. Can you pop that one back up there, Dan? What was the second half of that?
The second, I can't because I.
Oh, are they?
The second half of it was whether brand new to publishing or adding publishers as a secondary role to their business.
Okay, so another trend that we've seen a lot of in the last 4 years specifically are indie devs turning into publishers because they've gone out and they've had success as with whatever game it is, and then they want to build on that and help other indie devs. 9 times out of 10, it's fine. There's going to be this situation where sometimes, the studio got a little bit lucky and didn't really have to go through all the stuff that, successful games typically go through to be successful. And they may be underestimating the amount of work it takes to actually go full bore and publish a game. But it all comes down to the people at the end. If they're new or if they are, even new to publishing or even adding publishing to something else, you always still want to check in and see who's behind this, who is actually going to be doing the work, find out who your producer contact is going to be at that publisher, because that's going to be very, very important. You can have wildly different experiences with a publisher between 2 different developers simply based on who their contact was and who their producer was at the studio. At the publishing level. So it's a lot of the same. It is difficult to say, okay, if you don't have that big old long list of sketchy ass titles that the publishers launch, it's a little harder to go, okay, let me see where this has gone. But always upon always, you can check the individuals behind it. And if you do that and they don't come from the industry at all, there's your red flag. Let somebody else be their test case. No need to risk it. But yeah, look at the individuals behind everything.
All right, let me pull up one from Twitch here. What are your thoughts on working with agencies versus devs doing their own biz dev publisher hunt? What are you laughing at now?
Because the first 7 or 8 years of my career, I was an agent. And even now, our consulting firm helps developers find publishers. So, John, I am a little biased, but I'm going to say, yes, I do believe there's value in it. But like everything else, too, it's a matter of look at the people involved. The company that I started in the industry with was called Octagon Entertainment, and we were straight up agents. We did everything from, country by country distribution deals all the way through to, full blown multi-million dollar development. I did the first publishing contract for Starbreeze back in the day. I did Paradox's first distribution deals here in the US. We worked with CCP when Eve first came out. The reason that we ended up transitioning the company and turning it from an agency into a publishing company is because the phrase agent got such a bad name from other companies out there. And to this day, there's still 3 or 4 that, are really good. And I absolutely recommend, folks look at. One is my good friend, Ed Dilly over at Fog Studios, but you've also got DDM and several other agencies that have been around for a long, long time. They know what they're doing. They're very reputable. The problem was, we would see situations, and we still see this. This has not changed. Now they're, more consultants, and they may call themselves agents, but whatever. It would be something along the lines of a producer let go from a publisher, or they left a publisher and they feel that person knows everything that they need to know and they're going to become an agent, and they just don't do a good job. And, signing with an agent or a consulting firm, this is one of the first things I always tell developers that are working for us. Just because we're going to be pitching this to publishers does not guarantee you it's going to get published. You can't ever guarantee somebody. And if someone comes to you and says, work with us and I guarantee you we'll get you a publisher, that's a giant red flag. Because unless they are the actual publisher that they're going to sign, there's no way to go in and absolutely guarantee anything like that. It all comes down to, the companies and the publishers and what they view the game. We always tell our clients, we can get you in front of everybody that is a good prospect for this title. I can't guarantee you anyone's going to take it though, but we're going to try our ass off. One of our recent titles that has been signed by a publisher, we spent over a year. We probably sent it out 4 or 5 different times, that had, different iterations of the development and new features added and things like that. So there is, again, I'm biased, but yes, there is a good value in doing that and working with companies like that, if they're good at what they do. And one of the main reasons is time. It takes a lot of time to go out and identify these publishers, send out all the information, and then follow up with them and stay on them, because it's not like you could just send it out and instantly 5 or 6 publishers are going to, be all excited and knocking on your door. That's not the way it works. The other, as a side note, this is a comment that I've seen a lot, when we've been approaching developers on behalf of our publisher clients. The studio will tell us, well, we're already talking to several publishers and we don't want to talk to any more. Never do that. Talk to everybody. Absolutely, because you never know when a deal is going to blow up and not happen. And if you set your sights and you're completely tunnel visioned on 1 or 2 different publishers, if that falls through, you're starting over at ground zero on everybody else. So don't ever do that. But yeah, I recommend it as long as they are good and reputable at what they do.
Oh, well, there we go. That's a short answer. That's the short answer. Oh, okay. So here is a question. There's a bunch of questions. So, and some of them got cut off because there was too many words. Lucky, should I avoid working with a publisher whose previous games have not sold well?
Yes. Unless it's your only option and you really need their money. And this gets back into the whole everybody's situation is different. Yes, that is a red flag that, they either aren't adding a lot of value to the development itself, or that they don't have a good reputation, with the public or whatever. But yes, absolutely. If you go and you start looking at, all of the ratings, and the ratings are all bad across all the games, that's a warning sign. So I would avoid it if you have other options. If you don't have other options, that's when it gets difficult. It's like, are you going to go in and take 70, 80% or 50, 70, whatever percent of something, or are you going to run the risk of self-publishing and potentially getting 100% of nothing? So it's, when your options are limited, it's a much tougher question to ask, because yes, there's absolutely a chance that your game is going to be the one that turns this publisher around. But in that first wave of triage, when you're looking at partners, if they have a long track record of mediocre games, they aren't someone I would prioritize.
Yeah, that's good. But then again, a lot of publishers, when they're first starting out, they take games that may be mediocre because that's how they got to make money. So Hitoshi Kano from YouTube, I've heard about publishers blurring the line between terms like gross revenue or marketing expenses. Is there a strict definition for these terms, or is it something you define in the contract?
So gross revenue is usually pretty simple. That is the amount of money that the publisher receives from the platform. So typically, aside, Epic's a little different, things like that. It's going to be the retail price minus the platform fee, whether that's 30% or 12% or whatever it is. The one that gets tricky is net revenue, which is the one that comes after that. Net revenue is the amount of money that you see from the publisher once they have deducted all of the stuff that they're going to deduct. And I think that's probably the bigger concern, especially when you say, marketing expenses. So yes, marketing expenses can be extremely nebulous, and you do have to be very careful with it. It's another one of those cases where I will say it's not as bad as it used to be. Back in the days of pre-digital, when everything had to go to a store, there was always a write-off for MDF. And Oscar, I know you're watching. If you can remember what MDF stands for, I would appreciate it. But basically what it was the bribe that you paid to Walmart to put you on an end cap. It was a fee that was always due to the retailers. It was a bribe. Let's just call it what it is. That's basically what it was. When you went to a Best Buy back in the day, and there were some games that were like at eye level and some that were down on the first shelf from the ground, there's a reason for that. When you went in GameStop, and this was always my favorite because it was so obvious, they would have the top 10 games selling games this month. And like the first, second, and third games were games that hadn't been released yet. So it's like, that can't be one of the best selling because it's literally not been sold. And you're not doing that well on pre-orders. That again was part of the MDF that the publisher paid to that retail store. The other one, we would have publishers come in and say, okay, well, our trade show expenses are part of the marketing budget. And we would go, no, it's not, because what would happen, and again, not making this shit up, I actually saw it happening. A publisher goes to E3 with 5 titles. They have, of course, their flight expenses, their booth, all that goes along with it. But they would credit that's total expense against every single game. So they're basically quintupling whatever their budget was to go there. Nowadays, it is a bit easier to explain marketing. The good companies out there will have something that says, it needs to be, marketing expenses need to be agreed upon the month before. It gets even worse when you're talking about user acquisition on a mobile game or a free to play game in general, because there's so much of it that has to go in there. But yes, in general, gross revenue is pretty much always going to be gross revenue. That's the retail minus the platform holder. The net revenue is, yes, Calix, a party on a yacht is definitely a marketing expense. Good luck with that one, though. The net is going to be a little more nebulous, but it basically takes out the stuff that the publisher has to recoup on or something like that, because that net is what you're going to be getting a percentage of. But when it comes down to what actually qualifies as a marketing, it's fairly common in these agreements that you can audit them. And if any contract or any publisher that doesn't give you any audit rights at all on the contract, big shady warning sign. But they are in most contracts now much easier to find. And always, if you aren't sure, ask the publisher straight up, can you outline what these marketing expenses are actually going to be and give us an estimate? Another thing that you can do is ask for a sample revenue share sheet. You want to see the Excel spreadsheet or whatever that publisher is going to use to say, this is how much you get, because getting a 50% rev share with some heavy-handed net revenue definition will end up getting you less money sometimes than if you're only getting 30% of, a lighter net revenue. So you always want to see, this is exactly how this is being, accounted for and drawn up. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Tyler. And I think you have a new headshot there, and it looks great. All right, what's next?
What's next? Another one from Nightwolf. Is it worth it to go with a publisher that brings great results, but has a horrendous social media presence that brings them a lot of hate?
Oh,
I love these.
I hate to say it. It depends. This one is more of, it depends on you more than anything else. If you know that this is an absolute, controversial, hated publisher, but they're selling shit tons of units, that's a you question. Are you willing to be associated with that publisher knowing you're going to get paid more? Or are you wanting to, step back and go, okay, we're not going to be dealing with this. I don't want to be mixed in with that. And we might make a little less because of it. That is really a question to you, because trust me, I have seen it both ways. I have done both types of deals. Games that I knew were going to get shitted on in the press, and they made boatloads of money. And some that I was just like, what? It's not worth me attaching my name or our client's name to this, and we're not going to do it. It's always tougher to make those decisions when the publisher's like really successful at what they do. Don't.
Okay, here we go. Would publishers agree to a contract where the percentage of revenue share is tied to the amount of wish lists upon release?
Who had that? That's a really good question. Where did that come from?
That came from Discord. I wasn't able to get the name in there because it wasn't too much text.
That's all right. Real quick, Oscar says, I think MDF was minimum development fund. The other one was minimum revenue guarantee. No, I'm thinking it was like marketing development funds, because it was something that was actually paid directly to Walmart, basically. All right.
This question was from Foxician. Follow the feathers. That's hard to say. Foxician, follow the feathers. Tongue tied.
All right. So that is a super good. Wait, leave that up there because I still have to read that. That's a really, really good question, because that's one of those. I've never done that in a contract, but it could be a really good way of, and my publisher clients are going to cringe when I say this, of, showing the ability of that publisher. If you have 10,000 wish lists when you sign with the publisher, and then 6 months later, when the game actually releases, you only have 15,000 wish lists, they didn't add as much value to that as somebody who may have bumped you up to 100,000 wish lists. Now, keep in mind, it is just one factor of the whole thing. Wish lists are not the end all be all of, the success of a game. We're seeing, especially bigger games, that window of announcement getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's not going to work in every case, and it should be one of the tools in the toolbox. But honestly, I haven't seen that yet, but it's not a bad idea. Because what you're doing is holding the publisher accountable to their side of the agreement for, promoting and getting the community interested in your game.
Ready for the next one?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm posting emotes in chat, so give me a second. Hold on. No. So let's pull up one from chat. How do you do market research for your game? I've heard it should be the publisher's job, and I've heard it should be the indie studio does that. That's from Swaggy Sean.
It's both your jobs. That's the bottom line.
Both of them.
And the beauty of this is we actually had Carl from VG Insights on here. If you go back in the archives of the YouTube page, or well, it won't be on Twitch, but it'll be on the YouTube page for sure, and probably on the Facebook page. There's a article. I mean, there's a whole show that we did on how you do market research for your games. In essence, what you want to do is very similar to if you've ever bought a house or you see how a real estate agent works, at least in the US. They always have comps. So when they're selling your house, they'll be like, okay, well, here's another house that has the same similar square footage and features, and it's in your area, and it sold for this amount. So this is what we should sell yours at. You basically want to look at the different games that match up to your genre and platform, but do not go into it and say, hey, we're making this open world action RPG, and this is how many units Breath of the Wild sold, and this is how many units Skyrim sold, so this is how many units we think that we're going to sell. No, that's not realistic. You need to make sure that you're targeting games that are realistic, and you always want a low, medium, and a high, but that high shouldn't be Breath of the Wild. That high should be something indie related that's a little more realistic on what you're doing. But the publisher, whether the publisher shows it to you or not, a good publisher is already doing this. And I see it because we do it for publishers. We sit down, we look at a game, we go, okay, here's the comps, and we have this entire spreadsheet that Patrick, God bless him, understands way more about spreadsheets and Excel than I do. But he puts this together for our clients. And it's like, here, look, here's the comps on all these games. And there'll be 20 or 25 games in there that he comps it against. But the good publishers are already doing that anyway. They know what the market potential of your game is because they have to factor that into, all of their profitability spreadsheets as well. But as the developer, it's absolutely your job too. So you can understand, is your budget realistic? And that's another good talk that's in from one of our past conferences where Kimberly Rodatos, and I'm always afraid I'm crucifying Kimberly's name when I say that, but where Kimberly did a whole session on how to make sure that your budget is reasonable and it's realistic. But it's everybody's job. But I would absolutely say, to the publisher, what are you looking at in terms of comparisons for this game versus what we're looking at? But it's a really good tool to put in your pitch deck too. It's like, look, here's whatever those little square charts are called. It's like there's 4 quadrants, but having that in there and demonstrating to the publisher that you know what you're talking about and you have looked into this too, it's a really good tool so they understand that you're serious and you know what you're doing.
Right on. Lucky, here's a comment from Discord. If you, for example, need $300K from a publisher, what would be a reasonable percentage?
So it's hard to say without knowing what your total budget is. That's a quick way of looking at it. If your budget is $1 million and the publisher is investing, $300K, you can adjust it, that way. If the publisher is paying for the entire project, it's a little different. I've had developers come to us and say, well, we want 300,000 and we're going to keep 80% of the revenue share. And that's the pitch that they give to the publisher. And the publisher is like, I don't think that's overly realistic right now, but it's going to depend on how badly you need that deal. It's going to depend on how badly that publisher wants to work with you. But anytime there is a advance, and I'm going to say development advance, because there's a difference between, what we call a minimum guarantee and a development advance. A development advance means they're paying you based on milestones so you can finish the game, i.e. without that 300K, your game's not going to go to market at all. You're not going to be able to finish it. The other side of it is a minimum guarantee, where, going back to that market research thing, the publisher can sit down and on their P&L spreadsheet and say, I think we're going to sell 200,000 copies of this stuff. So they'll come and basically guarantee you a safe bet of that 75,000, 100,000 copies sold, and they prepay you. And you basically don't get paid again until you burned through that whole, it's an advance royalty. They're basically just giving you your royalties in advance because they're very confident in the game. That's a different situation. That in that case, you don't necessarily need that money to finish the game. It's more of a demonstration of the publisher's faith in the title. But again, it's going to come down to, if the publisher is not paying for the entire game, I would start it somewhere around 50-50. But it's hard to say, because I need to look at the game, I need to look at your options, I need to look at a whole bunch of other stuff. I wish I could give you a better answer on that, but it really does. It just comes down to a whole lot of factors.
A whole lot of factors. All right, let's see. Let's pull one up from the chat here, from Hitoshi from YouTube. Some publishers say you keep your IP, but we get right of first refusal for your next game, or we get to decide if the DLC is done with someone else. How far should we stretch for control over here?
No publisher should be having a game or content developed for your game that you're not involved in. So, one, we don't have that many publishers anymore that are coming in and demanding IP. They are going, and this is one of the things I wanted to touch on later on, the signs that, it's not a bad publisher. It's just something scary in the contract that you may not have seen before, or you may not understand. A publisher is always going to have the option, the right to license your IP. Legally, they can't sell it without that, because they would be promoting and selling something that is based on a trademark that they don't own nor have the license to use, and that's legal jeopardy. I have not seen that many contracts, even in the last 10 years, where the publisher came in and said, we flat out own the IP. That's very much a thing of years past. Now, they are going to need to license it, and the clause that says, that deals with sequels and spinoffs and DLC and all that other stuff, what that clause typically says is that, they have the first right to publish it and to distribute it, which is fair, and which realistically, if the game did well enough that it justifies ongoing DLC and live ops or sequels or whatever, 9 times out of 10, you've had a good enough relationship with that publisher that you're going to want to continue with it. Giving them the first look at it is often, quite frankly, beneficial to both of you. Some publishers will have a last match. That's where it gets dicey, because if they they give you an offer and then you say, well, I'm not sure I like that offer. You've exercised your right of first look, but we want to look around. When you start going to all the other publishers, all your other options, and they ask, well, why isn't so-and-so doing this first game? Why isn't so-and-so doing this game? Because they did the first one. And you say, well, they've got a last match clause. That's going to kill your deals, because and publishers know that. That's why they put them in there. Last match means you can go out and shop it. But if somebody offers you a deal, they have the ability and the legal right to basically offer you equal terms and get it. And so what every other publisher sees is, why am I going to offer you anything on this just so you can turn around and use it to go back to the original publisher and get you a good deal? So having the ability for a first look is a good thing. I mean, it's just typically, if you're going to do it, I mean, if that situation is up, you've had a decent relationship with it. Even if they opt to go with somebody else to, develop the DLC or the port, most likely, that's generally where that clause comes in. It's like, there's a port. You should still be getting money based on that. They are still developing content based on your IP. So, we've done things like put a 5-10% licensing fee into it, basically. But typically you see that where, the original studio doesn't have the capacity or the bandwidth to do a port or something like that to another platform. And so someone else does it. But at the end of the day, unless you sold your IP over to that publisher, you should be getting at least a small piece of everything that comes from that IP, because it's your intellectual property.
All right. Intellectual property. So here we go. If a publisher, this is from Nightwolf from Discord, if a publisher asks about your third-party contracts, affiliates, influencers, or game key distribution deals, how much information should you give to them?
I'm trying to figure out when that would actually happen. One, if you have game key distribution deals, that's typically the influencers and things like that. I'm just trying to think if that would mean like actual game distribution deals, because that can get a little sketchy. But there's no reason. This is the beauty of the "it depends" clause. And going back to the question earlier about should you have an agent or a specialist do this, there are so many different ways to structure contracts. And so we've done deals where a publisher has the right to publish the game on Steam and the Microsoft Store, but the developer is going to be the publisher on the Epic Game Store. That's a situation where that may come up if they're asking about what distribution deals you already have. It is very easy, though. And we've got multiple clients that have gone through this recently where they have a game out in early access, and the actual publisher needs to be transferred in Steam or in Epic's Game Store. That's very easily done. That's not something that's a huge deal. You basically have to do very little more than just sending Epic an email and saying, hey, look, we're working with this publisher and they already have a relationship with you. And so we need to make them, the actual publisher on the platform. There is no shortage of ways you could chop up and do this sort of stuff. We do deals where territories like China or Japan are called out, and that publisher is only going to publish in those territories, or that publisher is going to have worldwide distribution except for those territories. When it comes down to the content creators and that sort of stuff, it is generally in your best interest to work together with the publisher. And it's like, if you have a better relationship with XYZ streamer than they do, maybe you talk to them. If they have one, they talk to them. It's in everybody's best interest to market the game and get the game out there and let people know the game exists. That's not an area where you want to be going head to head and arguing with, a publisher or distributor or anybody. Everybody wins if more people know about your game. So typically, it's perfectly fine. And one of the first questions that we tend to get asked when we send a game, to a publisher is, how big of a following do they have? How big is their Discord? Do they have an email mailing list? How many wish lists do they have? How many Instagram, Twitter, Facebook followers do they have? All of that is very common, basis. Where I see some publishers read that information incorrectly is if we're sitting there and we're talking about a specific game, and they're looking at the reviews of the previous game, and they're like, well, they only got like 90 reviews on the last game. It must not have been that good. And I'm like, no, It means they were a small studio from Brazil who self-published it, didn't have the capacity to do the things that need to be done, and that's the best they could do. It doesn't mean that it was a bad game at all. It just means they weren't as good as marketing as somebody else was. So it's always in everybody's best interest to work together on the marketing and the outreach and the content creators and all that sort of good stuff. And a good publisher will do that and will allow for that in the contract as well.
Excellent. We are getting close to time. We've got like 10 minutes left. So let's get some questions in. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 right now coming up.
All right, hold on. Let me get through the rest of my quick list. Keep putting questions in.
Okay, question from Lucky.
A couple of other little points before I completely forget on my bullet list that I made today. If a publisher comes in, and it's like those Jeff Foxworthy things, you might be a redneck. If a publisher comes in and completely takes over your social media and starts banning people and kicking people out and taking over forums and basically scorched earthing your existing community, that's a bad sign for the very reason that I just talked about. It's in everybody's best interest to build the community and get things out there. And if they're just starting to come in and they want to, if they want to take over your existing social media, that's a red flag, because they should have their own social media that they're working on. They may want to work together with you on social media, but they shouldn't be taking over your accounts in the first place. And then the last one I'll bring up before we get back to questions, and this is life in general. If someone threatens you with a lawsuit, just like kind of out of the blue or early into a discussion, that's a bad sign, because 25 years of doing deals, no, they haven't all gone great. Do you know how many I've had actually go to court and get lawyers involved, other than a lawyer sending an initial letter saying whatever, cease and desist, or this has come to my attention, blah, blah, blah. One. In 25 years, I have done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of contracts and, deals between publishers and developers. I have had exactly one actually go to court. Anyone who is going to sue you isn't going to necessarily warn you up front. It's a tedious process. It's an expensive process. And quite frankly, it is in everybody's best interest to settle something before it gets to that point. So if you are in early stages of dealing with a publisher or a marketing firm or anyone else, and something goes sideways and they start screaming that they're going to sue you and you're going to hear from their lawyer, one, you're probably not going to. And two, it's a red flag, because nobody actually wants to do that. And that's one of the things that we teach in, when we're looking at contracts with our clients. And they're like, well, this seems sketchy for, whatever part of the world this is in. And I'm like, so what are you going to do? Sue them? You're going to, even a mid-sized studio, it's not a minor process to find an attorney in another country and go after somebody. So, we frequently pitch, this is the legal law, and this is the realism, law of the situation. You're not going to go, for example, a US or Western European team is not going to just turn around and sue a Chinese publisher over something, because it's not ever going to amount to anything, and it's a giant waste of money. So be wary of companies that threaten to sue you very quickly, because chances are, one, is not going to happen, and two, they're sketchy in the first place. All right.
Sketchy in the first place. All right. So from Lucky, should you do a Kickstarter before or after negotiating with a publisher?
Well, if you shouldn't have to do one after, if the publisher is your reason for getting funding. If you are doing a Kickstarter, and some publishers do this. I mean, doing a Kickstarter for basically marketing reasons is a very viable process. And I know several publishers who do that, but that's a discussion that you have together with the publisher. Doing a Kickstarter before you get a publisher is a tricky situation, and literally talked to a team about this yesterday. One, unless you have a very, very strong community, if you've watched any of our talks in the past, and again, they're all on the YouTube page and everywhere else, with Anya from Kickstarter, you'll know that one of the most, when she first told me this, it was both surprising and terrifying. When you do a crowdfunding campaign, 80% of the money that you see is going to come from your existing community. Only 20, maybe 30% of the money that comes in to your Kickstarter is going to be from new people. It's all going to be, for the most part, from your community. So if you don't already have a strong community, don't run a Kickstarter in the first place, because a Kickstarter is not where you're going to magically find new community.
Mm-hmm.
A failed Kickstarter looks really bad. When you look at how many games publishers are looking at, and I know publishers who are seeing upwards of 60, sometimes 100 during peak conference times of games coming in a week. I can tell you, for the companies that we scout for, we don't have any that want to see even more than 15 a week, because part of our job scouting is to triage a lot of stuff out of there. But, for small to mid-sized publishers, running a greenlight committee and okaying and evaluating games is not it's time consuming to do it right. And so they're only seeing the ones that they want to see. And if you go through that checklist and they start looking at all your stuff, and then one of them is, well, they had a failed Kickstarter, that's not going to remotely help your chances of getting them signed.
Doesn't look good. All right, here we go from Rice from Discord. As a new unknown studio, how important is it to show actual public interest in your game to impress a publisher?
A lot. It is very, very key. It helps your case exponentially. You should, the minute, and we talked about this before, the minute you have something to show, a screenshot, GIF, whatever, you need to have that on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, whatever, and be building that community and pointing them back ideally to a Discord server where you can have your whole community, keep them engaged, and use them to further evangelize and engage other people in your game. That is one of the things that we look at primarily, not primarily, one of the core things that we look at when we're looking at titles for our clients. What is the community reaction so far? Is that fair? No, it's not, because we also see a lot of games that are really good, but that developer doesn't have the bandwidth to go out and do all this sort of stuff. So no, they don't have the buzz already. That's a different situation. That requires a good publisher or a good scout or a good consulting firm that sees through a lot of that stuff. But one of the factors that a publisher is going to look at is how much interest have you built up in the game already. That's why we say it never, ever, ever hurts to build up your community early on, because either the passion and the size of that community is going to help you find a publisher, because the publisher can look at this game and go, okay, there's already strong interest in it. Or the worst case scenario, if you have to go and self-publish, that community is your starting point. So it's very important to go out there and start doing this stuff and getting some hype up before you start talking to publishers, so you can show, yes, there is a desire, there is a want for this type of game.
Right. And so this is a follow-up, and there's some more other comments with it as well from Lucky. To build on the above question, how big of a community do you need to impress a publisher as a first-time studio? And then Merly in Discord says, is it more than 1,000 members on Discord and 10K followers on Twitter?
It's hard to say. It's like that old definition of porn. It's like, I can't describe it, but you're going to know when you see it. Every publisher is going to have their own threshold. I can tell you it is a lot easier to get somebody's attention if you say this game already has 10,000, 50,000 wish lists, whatever that may be. But there's not necessarily a cutoff point that publishers look at. The point where there is cutoffs that publishers look at is if they're looking at KPIs on existing tests for mobile games. Then you start getting into a couple of hard lines of, we want to see this much engagement day 1, day 7, day 3, whatever they use. Obviously, the answer is going to be the more the better, but I have yet to come across a publisher who says, well, we're not going to pick up that title because they only have 9,000 people on their, their Twitter following. There are a lot of publishers out there who see the fact that you don't have a lot as a good thing. If they can go in and they've identified this as something that is new and unique, and this could be really awesome, then you get on the flip side of that where it's like they want to grab it because no one else knows it's out there yet, and it hasn't. Every other publisher in the world isn't going for it as well. There's not necessarily a hard number. Look at your peers in the industry and benchmark it. That's the easiest thing to do. Almost everybody has a Discord server these days. Almost everybody has Twitter and Instagram followers. Look at developers at, the same stage that you're at. Don't go and look at, somebody who, has released their game and they have tons of followers and it was a big success. Look at, your true peers in the industry and benchmark yourself there. At this stage of development, with this size team, with this experience as a studio, this is what we have versus this is what other similar developers have. Do that. Don't worry about, honest to God, like thresholds of numbers, because that's not something that ever really comes up.
Right on. We're getting close here, you guys. Actually, we are over time, but that's okay. We've got more questions. Graham of Legend question: is it normal for a publisher to want to change your already marketed game IP to an IP that they own, and is that okay?
I wouldn't say it's normal that much anymore, but it's not unheard of. The question that you need to ask yourself is that other IP going to help us sell more units than ours will? Typically, if a publisher is asking to do that, they feel strongly that IP that they're going to apply to it is going to be a big benefit, because it's not a trivial thing. It's not like you can just go in there and change the title screen and some character names and ta-da, you're all of a sudden in the Fallout world. It's a lot of work to go in and make a transition like that. And yes, I've seen it. Yes, we've done it on projects. But typically the only time that's going to come up is if it is a very powerful IP that is really going to benefit all parties involved. So yeah, it's done. But I wouldn't say it's normal, because it's really not that normal anymore. Because think about it. When all the games get released every week, there's only a certain number of those that are real, honest to God, certifiable franchises that have, big IPs attached to them. So, yes, it's done. Not necessarily normal, but, if they want to do it, there's generally a really good reason for going in and, and wanting to do that, because it's a lot of work to do properly. Now, if they want to come in and slap an IP on it and not do any changes, there's your warning sign. Saying that from a guy who was a large part of a whole ton of GBA and Nintendo DS licensed, mainly children's licensed crap, where that's what we did, was we came in and basically stuck an IP on top of an existing game. And yeah, it did impress. The sales did get better, but it's a lot of work to do it properly.
All right, we're going to get into some Steam page stuff here.
Score.
I've heard a lot about getting Steam page up early for marketing and community reasons. Would having the page up beforehand be a deal killer for publishers? Honestly, I've heard publishers say yes and publishers say no. So that's probably a depends question.
And it's like, you can go back on this show 6 months, a year, and somebody asked me that same question, and my answer is going to be different. What we're seeing right now in the industry, it's not going to hurt you that much to have a Steam page up with a wish list option. I haven't seen that many publishers come out and say it has a wish list page, we don't want to work with it. What happens is when you start selling it, that's the problem. And when we absolutely have publishers who don't want to look at anything that is already in early access. because they feel that the initial marketing opportunity on that game is gone. They can't, do anything about it and help position it and help promote it. And they just don't want to touch it. So my advice as of last of October, 1st of November, 2021 is, yeah, you're fine to have a wish list, and that's good because you're building, strength in your brand and getting awareness out there. I would not, if you plan on going to a publisher, I would not start selling it in early access yet, though. And I know that's tough because a lot of times developers only, start selling something in early access because they need the money. But the minute you start selling the game in early access, you're going to lose about 50% of your possible publishers.
Yeah. So here's regarding the Steam page. And I think I have a question to ask Lucky back. Question is, should I have a good trailer for the game before making a Steam page for it? And my question back to you is, why would you make a place for people to go if you're not going to show them anything? Right?
You should absolutely have a good trailer. And you should absolutely find somebody of the appropriate skill level that you can afford to create said trailer.
I've seen trailers on Steam, and then it has like the whatever logo of the cheap video capture program, whatever, in the trailer. And that's not very appealing.
It's not appealing, but I mean, if it's effective, it's effective.
Right.
But videos are very much that foot in the door thing now with publishers. They want to see a video to see if it looks appealing. Then they want to look at a pitch deck, or they want to look at a pitch deck that has a video in it, and then they want to play it. So yes, you should always, whenever you're doing that outward facing promotion of the game, you always need to have your best possible foot forward. And so it's one thing on social media and like Screenshot Saturday or Wishlist Wednesday or whatever the fuck Tuesday we're doing. I don't know, Taco Tuesday. You can have earlier stage or rougher looking stuff there because you can preface it's like, hey, look, this is very early, but this is what we're working on. But when you go to that step of having an actual honest to God Steam page or itch page or whatever page, you want your best looking stuff there, because where people will easily forgive you on social media if it's not completely polished and gorgeous looking, they ain't gonna forgive you much on Steam.
Right. Lucky says, what I mean is, should I use the gameplay footage I have or wait and create a much better trailer? I would say for Steam, right? When people go to Steam and they look at videos, they don't want to look at a trailer. They want to see gameplay. At least I know I do. I will go through, bam. The first thing I do is, how's this play? And then I look at the Steam video. And if it's a bunch of not gameplay stuff, I might just pass that game, right? So they want to see gameplay.
Calix, I just discovered Turn-Based Thursdays yesterday, and I love it. I absolutely love it. But yeah, that's just one of our basic trailer tips. Start with the gameplay. What is it? Facebook says that we've had an engagement if somebody watches 6 seconds of a video. That's how long you have to capture that person's interest. And if you spend the first 5 seconds of that popping a bunch of, developer logos and all that sort of shit up there, no.
Just immediately jump into gameplay. Don't put logos later. Just like bam.
Or overlay it. Look at, so some of the best examples of eye-catching and quick to suck you in videos are on like the Apple App Store. They have very quick videos on there, and then they overlay the features that they are showing in the gameplay. And that is extremely effective. But
because that's what people think about when you are browsing through Steam for games, what you are doing, right? And then, because that's what people do. They look at it, they go to the game page. The first thing they do is look at the video. They don't read the description or the lore or any of that stuff. Yes, people care about that, but they want to see the gameplay. And then they'll watch it for like 10 seconds. And that's really it. That's the deciding factor right there.
Hold on.
Yeah. Oscar,
I just saw this comment from Div. It says, hey, let's do your game, but using Star Wars. That's not necessarily the dream if they want you to do a, Sims version of the Jar Jar Binks family. I mean, remember,
I would play that.
All IPs have a bad side. That's in all of them.
I would play that game. Jar Jar Binks Thursday.
All right, there was another one from Calix about Exola. I got you.
Okay.
I was listening to Justin say they might see more now how devs deal with the after release, like devs looking ahead and knowing all that work required. Yes, and I can actually add my own anecdote into that. It is extremely important that you have a post-launch strategy planned. We were looking at comparables this week for a game that one of our publishers is interested in picking up, and we noticed that one of the comparables had like over 10,000 reviews on Steam, and it was like all very positive. And then above it, it was like the recent reviews were mixed, and there was, I don't know, 80 to 100, maybe a little more. And I'm like, that's weird. You don't necessarily see that in that order. You might see total reviews be mixed, and then the more recent ones be very good because they've done something. When we started going through the different posts and the reviews, it was getting review bombed because the developers were not still putting content out for a $15 game over a year later after launch. That's a little excessive, in terms of the reviews coming in that heavy-handed on that. But what it says and what it shows is that consumers are looking at these things as long-term projects. And you read through those reviews and the people are like, well, this game's dead. It's not dead. There's a shitload of content that was made. You just got through it all, and now you're mad there's not any more. That doesn't necessarily make the game dead. But not only, consumers are looking for this. They want to know that there's a long tail of content plan for the game. And because of that, publishers are looking at it. And so they want to make sure that you have a long tail of content at least planned and understanding. And so when you're going in and doing your budget, yes, you should say, hey, here's the budget that we need to get to launch. And then these are our estimations on what the cost of ongoing content might be. And either that, it doesn't necessarily need to be full-blown live ops where you're, running a game as a service. It could be content drops, every couple of months or something like that. But you absolutely do need to be planning ahead and showing that you have at least thought through what's happening after launch.
What those reviews show, the review bombing show, bless you, is that people really liked the game and they were ticked off when they.
It does. I mean, it really does. But it's also very shitty of the consumers to be doing that, because it's like,
yeah, untapped potential, as Oscar Clark says. It's a missed opportunity, is what that is.
We don't have to get into some of my anger at gamers in general sometimes, right. But yeah, that's one of them. What else have we got? Have we got anything else?
That's it. Those are, we hit all the questions.
Awesome. All right. So bottom line takeaway on all of this, at the end of the day, do your research. Make sure that when you're talking to a publisher, you are looking into who they've worked with, contacting those people. Do not ask a publisher for references. That's like, an employer asking you for references. Do you give them the reference of the boss that, you told to F off and stormed out of his office and slammed the door the last time? No, you give them references that are your friends and sometimes your family. Always make sure you're doing your own research. Look into the companies that this, publisher has worked with. Look into the individuals at that company that different studios have worked with and find out who you're going to be working with. Because it's very, very rare that you can do a proper amount of research and still end up getting screwed. It's not impossible. It happens, but you're not going to help yourself. And I do realize that sometimes it's tough when you've worked on a project for 2 or 3 years and you're not getting any interest in it from the publishing community in general. And then one publisher is all that interested. And you may look into it and they go, well, they've done some iffy things here and there, but they're my only option. Sometimes your better option is nothing. Do your research, look into it, make sure you know who you're getting into bed with and why. And that's all I'm going to rant about today. We're good.
That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And make sure we got a lot of people on Discord already. You can join our Discord at discord.gg/indiegamebusiness. And we got an upcoming event from December 1st through December 3rd. You want to talk about that, Jay?
Yes. So we've already got a load of good developers in there. We are anticipating this is going to be the best collection of indie games we've ever had, honestly,
Yes.
at one of these events. And so, to all of our developer friends out there, don't look at that as competition. Look at that as a good thing, because the more good games that we have, the more good publishers that are going to come in there and look at it. And
That's
we've
right.
also already got a lot of speakers lined up. We're still finalizing all of that, but as usual, we're going to have 2-3 days of wonderful speakers that are completely free. Just sign up. That way you get if you sign up and get a ticket for the free ticket, we automatically send you all the slide decks and all the stuff that goes along with it. But if you want to just watch along, then you don't need to do that. But yeah, coming up in just about a month,
Yeah.
our 9th event. We have literally been doing these longer than anyone else in the industry has.
That's crazy. And happy Pumpkin Day.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. See you guys later.
See
Have
ya.
a great one.